please hit that subscribe button. Hey everybody, better suited to win the Stanley Cup this season. If you are new to the channel, Washington Capitals, the Boston Bruins.
Locked on and he scored! And we're live. Hey everybody, so we got some huge hockey news this afternoon as Commissioner Gary Bettman held a press conference going heavily into detail about the next steps for the NHL return to play and how the rest of this year is going to work out, if it is able to work out the way that the league and the players want it to. It was a pretty detailed press conference. There was quite a bit of information packed into it. I'm not going to go through every single thing in this video, but I do want to touch on the major points and just talk a little bit about what is going to be happening over the next couple of months and how the NHL is coming back and some of the important stuff that they did talk about today. Before I begin, I just ask that you please hit that subscribe button if you're new and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps out a lot and is very much appreciated. But let's get into it here. There is a lot to unpack. I guess the best thing to start with is that the 24-team format that has been agreed upon is, that it wasn't officially... we knew it was agreed upon, but no one had come out and officially said much about it yet. But pretty much everything that we expected about the 24-team format was confirmed today. The matchups, the teams that are involved. We know that the top 4 teams from each conference are going to be playing a round robin for seeding. The other 8 teams are going to be playing a play-in round before getting to the playoffs. An important thing to get here: the play-in round does not count as part of the playoffs. So, there are not 24 teams in the playoffs this year. The playoffs will be 16 teams, just like they always are. The play-in round does not count as part of the playoffs. Now, doesn't really count as part of the regular season either, because as Commissioner Bettman said today at the beginning of the conference, is that the 2019-20 NHL regular season is over. The regular season is over. This is it. They are going right back into the play-in round / round robin for the top teams, and then the playoffs will begin after that once they determine which teams get in. So, teams like Chicago and Montreal, that a lot of people have been complaining about them having a part in this because they were so far down in the standings. They have not made the playoffs yet. They would need to win that play-in round series, which will be best of 5, before actually making the playoffs. So an important distinction is that the actual Stanley Cup playoffs are still 16 teams. The matchups, like I said, are what we expected. They went through all of them, but it's Pittsburgh versus Montreal, 5 versus 12, 6, 11, 7, 10, 8, 9, like we thought. So pretty much all the brackets you've seen and stuff like that are correct. Again, we don't know what the seeding for the top 4 are going to be because they are going to be playing for seeding. So Boston is not guaranteed that number 1 spot in the East. They could go and lose all 3 games against the other top teams in the East, and they could drop to the 4 seed. So there's still quite a bit to be determined with that as well. Let's see. The games are going to be played in hub cities. There are going to be 2 hub cities where everything is going to take place. One for the Eastern Conference and one for the Western Conference. The NHL has not picked those hub cities yet because obviously this is something that is constantly changing. They're gonna, where there might be, where they're able to do it could change between now and over the next couple of weeks. So they have narrowed the list down though to 10 hub cities, and I have a list of them here. We have Las Vegas, which obviously has been heavily rumored to be one of the top choices just because of, the ability to have everyone there and, just what Las Vegas brings as far as hotels and stuff for the players to do. You can kind of keep the players sectioned off in Vegas in their own area and, keep them away from everyone else, and they can still, have a lot to do And Vegas is just setting up to be a very, very good hub city. And that is expected to be one, although it's not official yet. Vegas is definitely one of the top choices. Chicago, Columbus, Edmonton, Dallas, Los Angeles, Minnesota, Toronto, Vancouver, and Pittsburgh. So as you can see, a lot more Western Conference cities there than Eastern Conference cities. And that's not surprising given the fact that particularly in the U.S., I'm not so sure about Canada, but particularly in the U.S., the East Coast, well, not the coasts were hit a lot more than the Midwest, the middle of the country, and the East Coast, and particularly the Northeast in the U.S., has gotten hit with New York, Boston, areas up where near I live. This whole region has gotten hit extremely hard. Whereas when you look at cities like, when you look at Minnesota and St. Paul, Minneapolis, that was never, a huge hotspot area. Columbus is a area that got it kind of early, but it's definitely decreased in Ohio. Ohio is a place now where they've lifted much of their restrictions to this point. I'm a little surprised Los Angeles is on the list. California has been an interesting state throughout this whole thing where they're still very, very restricted. So I am a little surprised Los Angeles is on the list. I would be surprised if Los Angeles actually became one of them. Dallas is another Midwestern, Texas city where, again, not overly hard hit in particular compared to some other places. So that one's not surprising. You see more Western Conference cities than East. They may end up playing in two Western cities. It doesn't really matter. There's not going to be fans there. It really doesn't matter. So, but those are the cities that are currently under consideration. Let's see, what else? So we've talked about the teams that have made it. The 24-team format was it was confirmed, and it's pretty much how we expected it to be. We talked about the hub cities. I know I'm forgetting stuff that I want to talk about before going on to the draft lottery, which is its whole other thing. Well, I guess we can go on and talk about that because nothing else in particular is coming straight to my mind here. Let me see. I'm scrolling through stuff now, just trying to. Lengths. Yes. So the play-in round, the qualifying round for the playoffs will be best of 5 game series. The NHL is still determining whether the first or second round of the first and second round series lengths will be shortened. And they might go to best of 5. It will either be best of 5 or best of 7 series in the first and second round. What we do know is that the conference finals and Stanley Cup finals will still be full 7-game series. So the NHL did announce that today, that it will be full 7-game series for at least the conference finals and the Stanley Cup. The first and second round is still to be determined. It will either be best of 5 or best of 7, and then the qualifying play-in round to get into the playoffs will be best of 5. So those first series that we watched, the Pittsburgh versus Montreal, Toronto versus Columbus, all of that stuff will be best of 5 series to determine who gets into the playoffs and who goes home. So I think that is, for the most part, the important stuff. The timeline for this, another thing, a lot of questions that still remain about what's happening is the timeline, and that is something that we do not know. What we do know is that Phase 2, which consists of small group workouts and just players getting back on the ice, is expected to begin at the beginning of June, which now is within a week or so. It's something that could potentially begin as early as sometime next week. Phase 2 is the next step, which will just be groups of 6 or smaller, and players can just start working out at team facilities again. Players can get on the ice again, but it's going to be very restricted, very controlled. No coaches, as little other stuff is possible other than those select, whatever players can get on which days or at what time and whatever. So that's still very, very restrictive. Phase 3 is when training camps actually open up. And one thing that was talked about today during the press conference was the NHL does not expect training camps to even begin opening up until after July 1st. So that pushes this timeline back a little bit later than I think might have been originally thought. where we were thinking, maybe mid-June for training camps and then playoffs starting, or games at least starting at the beginning of July. That has been pushed back now to where it looks like training camp will not be starting until at some point in the beginning of July. And we probably won't be seeing hockey games, actual meaningful games, until end of July, really at the earliest at this point. So that's still a ways away. We're still looking at another couple months before we actually see games happening. So that's something that can change. But the commissioner today did say that he does not foresee training camps opening before July 1st. So, and then they're probably going to need, at least 2 to 3 weeks of training camp before they can actually play games. So, we're certainly looking at end of July, I would think, for first of these games starting, and that is not anything that even is set in stone yet. They did not really put a timetable on any of this because, as it was talked about in the press conference, this is an ever-changing situation. It's a very fluid situation. There's obviously a lot going on. There's a lot of new data. And we could get a spike in cases and all of this could, completely get derailed, or maybe things die out a little bit faster than they expect and maybe it can be moved up. They were very hesitant to really put a timeline on any of this today. It was very much like it's just we're setting up the phases, but we don't know when each of these are going to be able to happen. And they really did not put a timeline on much of anything other than they don't expect training camps before July 1st. So it would be July 1st or later that training camps would open. And then there was absolutely no date put on when games could begin. And that brings us to the draft lottery, which is the other side of this, because there's been lots of questions going on about the draft and how this was going to go. Obviously now the hopes or the possibility of a June draft is off. There will not be a June draft. There was a little bit of talk about that going back a few weeks, but obviously they could not come to an agreement on anything that would allow for the draft to happen virtually in June. I think a lot of that would have to do with the conditional draft picks, which was a major concern I brought up when they were talking about doing a June draft. How do you have, what would happen to these conditional draft picks that, were traded for at the deadline or even before that and are largely based on how far the team goes in the playoffs? Well, now if you do the draft before the playoffs, you don't know how far the team went and you don't know which pick they should have. So that was probably one of the bigger concerns as far as a June draft goes, and at this point there is not going to be a June draft, so it looks like it's going to be after whenever this season ends as normal, and it's going to be a fall NHL draft for the 2020 NHL draft. So here I got a post here from Complete Hockey News, which explains everything kind of in a much simpler term than how it was during the press conference today, because they made this whole draft lottery thing pretty complicated, and although I think it came off as a bit more complicated than it actually is, because there is a phase 1 and potentially a phase 2 to this, but the NHL Draft Lottery, not the NHL Draft, the Draft Lottery will be on June 26th. And it will determine the first, second, and third overall pick. Will determine the first, second, and third overall, and will have the same odds as last season. All right, so the draft odds remain the same. 15 teams will take part in the draft lottery. The 7 eliminated teams from the play-in round that do not make the 7 eliminated teams who are not even continuing their season at all, whose seasons are already over. Buffalo, New Jersey, Ottawa, Detroit, San Jose, LA, and Anaheim, their seasons are over. It's done. They're not involved in anything else, game-wise going forward. So they are obviously a part of the draft lottery. And the 8 teams that lose in the play-in round, also have a chance in the draft lottery. So they will not make the playoffs. They'll have a chance in the lottery. Now, we don't know, obviously, this is where the phase thing comes in, because on June 26th, we are not going to know who the 8 teams that lose are, because training camps won't even be open yet, and there certainly will not have been a game played on June 26th. So we don't know who those 8 losing teams are from the play-in round. So basically what that does is they're going to have a placeholder spot in the lottery for those teams, depending on who they are. Or we won't know who they are, so there's just going to be a placeholder spot there. And basically what is going to happen is if any of the bottom 7 teams that are not part of the 24 that are going to be continuing their season when this starts up again, win any of those top 3 spots. Hang on, I want to get this right here. It was a bit confusing here. If any of the bottom 7 teams win any of the 3 lotteries, they will pick in that spot. If any of the play-in teams win any of the 3 lotteries, they will move on. The pick will move on to a phase 2 lottery. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. If all 3 lotteries are won by a bottom 7 team, then a phase 2 lottery will not have to take place. So if the lottery gets won, everyone looking for that number 1 overall pick, if the lottery gets won, or the top 3 picks, if the lottery gets won by those teams that aren't playing anymore and won't be playing, then there's no need for a phase 2. Because none of those, we know who the teams are. None of those play-in teams got it. Now, if there will be a phase 2 if one of those play-in teams ends up winning it, because we don't know which team it will be until after the play-in round, and that is when phase 2 would take place, and then they would do basically another lottery, I guess, to determine order. It's pretty confusing. But once the top 3 picks are determined, the final 12 picks will be for lottery picks will be determined by inverse order of the standings at the time the season was put on hold. So the worst teams will get the best picks, and the better teams that from when the season was put on hold will get the later picks. And then obviously the playoff teams will get ordered after the playoffs. But yeah, so the draft, that was the most complicated thing about all of this, was the draft and the draft lottery, and that is coming later. But we do know that the draft lottery will be on June 26th. The NHL draft is obviously now not taking place in June. It's going to be a fall draft after all of these things get settled. The 24-team format was pretty much confirmed. So I know that's a lot, guys. This video is pushing 20 minutes. I did not expect it to even go this long. I just wanted to touch on some of the important things that were talked about today. And we are another step closer towards hockey being back, which obviously is great. I think, like I've said, on this channel now for weeks, I think this 24-team format is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be really interesting. It certainly is not perfect, but we do not live in a perfect world, and we are in unprecedented times right now that no league has ever had to deal with before. So there is no perfect way to do it, and there is absolutely no way to make everyone happy. There just isn't. But what they're doing is trying to make it the best for the most people as possible, the most teams as possible, and the most fans as possible. And overall, a large majority of people want hockey to come back. They want playoffs this summer. And I think this is, probably the best, most realistic way for them to do that. So I have no complaints. So with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon and merchandise store are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.